Hebrew lesson, April 30th on Zoom, part 1. Shalom, shalom. Shalom, shalom. This is the recreation of our Hebrew lesson on the Zoom earlier today. The first thing that we got into, the main thing, was Hebrew roots. And when I say Hebrew roots, I don't mean the Hebrew roots movement, although I don't think it's a total coincidence that the name of the Hebrew roots is Hebrew roots movement. There's a scripture in Romans that talks about being grafted in and talks about the roots. We're going back to the Hebrew roots of the faith. But what I'm talking about is if you go to university and you take Hebrew, one of the very first things that they'll cover in Hebrew 101 is the fact that Hebrew words can be boiled down to three consonant letter roots. So three-letter roots made up of consonants. So you take away the vowels and you're left with the three consonant root. And this happens in English as well, but it's more pronounced in the Hebrew. It's one of the keys to understanding the Hebrew language. Once in a while you'll get what's called a two-consonant root, and that's called a parent root, but that's more rare. I don't know what the exact percentage is, but we'll say 9 times out of 10 you'll get a three-consonant root for a Hebrew word. So the example I gave earlier is in English, because in English you have root words as well. It's just that in Hebrew you can triple or quadruple that, and it goes a lot further in the Hebrew. It's a real basis of the entire language. But in English, to give the example, if we take the word song and we take the vowel out of it, which is the O, you get the three consonant letter root, which is SNG. It's the three consonant letters, and that three consonant letter root gives you the basic concept. However, we would define the concept of this root in English. Same general idea carries over into the Hebrew. So you get a basic concept in the root, and then you conjugate it. So, for example, in the English, if I conjugate song, which is a noun, into sing, so I change the vowel from an O to an I, right? The I vowel has replaced the O vowel, but the three consonant root remains the same. So the point is, in English, we would realize and recognize that this is the same three consonant root, even though they're two different words. They're not two totally unrelated words. These words are related by the root that they share. Likewise, we could add a suffix on the end, is what they would call that in language, an ending, an extra ending on the end, right? So if I put sing-er, right, now we've got a noun, once again, like song is a noun, but singer is a different noun than song, but it still shares the three consonant root, and in this case it has the same root, but now it's added on an extra consonant letter. So that extra consonant letter is not part of the root, it's called a suffix. Now, one really well-known suffix that we use in English is we use for plural words, right? How do you make a singular word in English plural? And I think this is one that everybody who speaks English would know. So if I put an S on the end, consonant letter S, and add that to a word, to any word, add it to singer and I get singers plural. Add it to songs and I get songs plural. So I make a noun plural, and when we're conjugating first person, second person, right? I sing, we'd call that first person. Second person would be you sing, right? So I myself am the first person, right? And if I'm talking to another person right across from me, that person would refer to as you, second person, right? This is just basic information that whether you know the technical terms or not, we're familiar with in everyday use of English. So you get first and second person, and then the third person would be a third party over here who's not directly involved, right? And we call a third person he, she, or it, right? So let's say he, right? So the third person form of sing in the English, right? I sing, you sing, he sings. See, we put an S on the end, a suffix, and that just made it third person, right? Rather than first and second person. So similar things happen in the Hebrew to conjugate verbs. And you can get an irregular verb in English, and you can get an irregular verb in Hebrew, same sort of thing. But the majority of verbs follow a general pattern. So if I take the infinitive of the verb to be, they call that an infinitive. Same thing in Hebrew, there's an infinitive form. But if I take that verb and I conjugate it, first person is I am. It's an irregular verb. It doesn't conjugate in the normal pattern for English verbs, right? And what would I say? You are. You see how that works. And we'd say he or she is. So even though these three look totally unrelated, they're three conjugations of the infinitive to be. So you can see that in the English, and that carries over into the Hebrew. So when people speak in the Hebrew and they say, oh, this word is the same root word as this word, and maybe you've heard that a bunch of times and you think, well, that really seems random. And sometimes the connection's very obvious because it's a regular conjugation of the word, and other times it's not as obvious because it's like the English to be that conjugates in an irregular form. So sometimes in the Hebrew you'll get the same thing. You can get a root, and the Hebrew goes further than the English. So, right, in the Hebrew and the English you can get, like I said, singular, plural. You can get past tense, present tense, future tense, first person, second person, third person. Even, you get into even more complicated tenses like he is singing, right? And they have a name for that in English, and it's different than the other ones. Probably participle or something along those lines, if I remember my English grammar correctly. But at any rate, you get all of that out of the root. But in Hebrew, what you get in addition is you actually can get distinct words that in the English appear to have different meanings. So out of one Hebrew root, you get maybe, let's just say, 4 words in this case. I'm just making up a number. It could be 2 words, could be 5 words, could be 4 words. But this is the way the Hebrew language works. So, right, you get words that on the surface, they might appear to be unrelated, but they share the same root. And remember, what the root is the basic concept. So like when we're talking about sing, singer, song, I'm not sure how we would define that precisely, but something to do with music, something to do with sound, something to do with sound put to music, right? Would be the English SNG. And as it's conjugated differently, even though there's different nuances to the different conjugations, it all has that same basic root concept of sound put to music. This is the end of part 1, April 30th Zoom Hebrew lesson. End of part 1. Shalom, shalom.